the statements of Benjamin Netanyahu, I think it's important to also look back a bit at the history of Netanyahu, who, just going back to in the post 9/11 era, played a big role in stirring up the lies about Iraq, and stirring up the militarism that the US waged in the post 9/11 so-called war on terrorism, in the sense that it's important to, I think, point out this history of where these officials have the long track record of this type of complete disinformation, propaganda, dehumanization, in order to justify their actions, their policy decisions, and their very violent, devastating policy decisions, which we're seeing now is, the UN, even UN officials, former UN officials, people who have resigned in protest, but have called this, what we're currently seeing, a genocide against people in Gaza, given that, when you look at just the definition of genocide in terms of the intent to destroy people in whole or in part, it becomes really clear and really evident the intent of officials such as Netanyahu and Netanyahu's cabinet members, who have said the most dehumanizing things about Palestinians, about Hamas, but the way that they frame it is very clear that they're talking about Palestinians as a whole, because they just from their statements, from their quotes, and it's often, it's important to also see what they are saying internally in Hebrew versus what they are saying externally in English. Often, we've seen these officials where they go on in the early morning in 8 a.m. Western time, US time, to try to make the early news, and give statements in English saying they're respecting rights of Palestinians in Gaza, that they are given a warning that the people in Gaza must leave these particular areas before they are going to be carrying out the next series of bombing. But it's quite clear why they are doing this in English and why they're doing this in this time. There's a really different way that they spin this propaganda for Western consumption, for US media, particularly Western corporate media, which consistently just repeats, the lines that come out of Israel and the lines that come from the IDF and from the Netanyahu administration, with often very little critique, little to no critique. And in doing so, they are repeating incredibly dehumanizing language that is used to basically justify violence, really systematic, planned out and orchestrated violence against Gaza that they have been carrying out for decades, as you say. October 7th was not the beginning of a war in the way that they frame it. It was definitely a brutal attack, and did target a lot of civilians. And of course, that is important to condemn in any way when civilians are harmed. But there is completely an asymmetric power, and many there have been many statements, even from people who were kidnapped and then released, Israelis released. People have made statements, really trying to compel the state of Israel to stop the violence, that they don't want this violence to continue in their name, that this violence is not going to weed out Hamas insurgent fighters, all it's going to do is lead to more brutality and more devastation. And so I think it's important to look at those statements that people, within Israel are saying, what writers are saying in Haaretz, the media outlet in Israel, which actually publishes far more critical stances against Israeli policy than corporate U.S. media in a lot of ways. I think it's really important to hear the voices of hundreds and hundreds of people in the U.S. who are Jewish, who are part of the Jewish faith, as I am, who grew up Jewish, who went through the whole process in the sense of in Sunday school growing up, it was completely unquestionable, the right of Israel to carry out whatever actions it was carrying out. It was always a consistent defense of Israel, and it was a consistent air of propaganda that really hovered, that convinced people, that was intended to convince people that Israel was somehow a haven, a safe haven for Jewish people in the world. And that's a really powerful propaganda point, because when that's all you grow up with, and that's the only side that you see, it becomes very difficult to start to understand the other side, particularly that the state of Israel was a colonial project and is a colonial project, and was originates out of the Balfour Declaration. The British Foreign Secretary, going back to 1917, who made the statement that they would, following the end of the Ottoman Empire, the British planned to turn over the territory to a Jewish nation in the middle of Palestine, knowing that it was a colonial project, that it was just going to follow an extension of British colonialism, and essentially, it has been an extension of U.S. and British neocolonialism, and Western foreign policy objectives in the Middle East for decades. But when you grow up with this consistent narrative that Israel is the promised land, that Israel is the home and the safe haven for Jews across the world, and then I went to Birthright. I did the Birthright trip, and they take you to all of the historic sites, of course, and explain everything from the perspective of convincing people that the land was somehow inherently owed to the Jewish populations across the world, and with stories of 4,000 years ago of how the Jews were so tied to this land, and then either completely ignore the other important historical monuments. There's no agenda in the Birthright tours to go visit the Al-Aqsa Mosque, to visit other of the most holy Christian sites either. It is very much a Jewish supremacist type of indoctrinating type of trip, but it is very hard to see beyond it. And I, in the sense of when you are kind of caught into this groupthink, and you're convinced this, it becomes very difficult to see beyond this. But I was over the years, and through involvement in other human rights type of organizing, particularly human rights organizing as it relates to U.S. policy in the Americas, I started to get a deeper sense of one, the role that Israel has played in repression in other countries, along with the U.S., or either in places such as in Latin America, when there were times when the U.S. had restrictions from Congress on funding right-wing military dictatorships that the U.S. had fomented and created, and often Israel would step in with weapons and training and intelligence, and starting to see that over the years, the devastating effect that U.S. and Israeli policies have had in the region really started to awaken me over the years to understand that Israel is not a just place. It's not a just state, and it deserves to be criticized, as any government deserves to be criticized when they carry out mass atrocities and mass systemic human rights violations against other people. And this is the most clear and evident mass atrocity that is being carried out, that we're watching in real time. And so you see the mass mobilization of people, including, hundreds in the US, thousands of Jewish people, leaders, rabbis, standing up and saying, not in our name, is a big message. And that's been the big message of a lot of these protests and actions, saying not in our name. We don't condemn this. We don't support these type of atrocities, and they should be protested. And US funding, particularly going towards these, should be ended and should not be used to support these ongoing abuses.